Hi, I'm Serena, and I'm here with Joel, who has played Shadow of the Erdtree for 3 hours, the new Elden Ring DLC. So let's get into it. I want to hear all about it.
Well, it was very fun, which was a good start. It's characteristically brutal. From Software haven't gotten any nicer with the time spent. It feels like more Elden Ring, which in a good way, in that it feels like a developed, further extension of what we got last time. I had a blast with it. I'm very excited for the full thing to come out.
You're in Moblin Palace. You've just defeated Mo. Is there any other bosses you have to have defeated to access the DLC?
So to access the DLC, you have to beat Moog and Radahn. And then to get to it, you go to Moog's arena and interact with the big cocoon with the arm hanging out of it. And then you get teleported to the new area. And then once you've found a site of grace, you can just teleport back and forth with the fast travel system as normal. And then you're off.
So, which bosses did you come up against in the DLC?
So I came up against 3. An optional boss called the Ghost Flame Dragon, which was an undead version of the dragons that you fight in the base game. There's all skeletal with bits of decayed meat hanging off it. And then the 2 main bosses that were, from what I gather, story essential that I went up against was something called the Divine Beast Dancing Lion, I believe it's called. Bit of a mouthful. And a knight called R'hllana, Twin Moon Knight, or something along those lines. They were both very brutal. The lion in particular is one of those really just great boss fights that sticks with you because it's animated and the way it moves is reminiscent of like a Chinese dragon. And it keeps switching between like various elements. So it goes lightning themed and then it goes ice themed.
Okay, so that explains it, because I've seen clips where this Chinese lion boss is using Deathblight in some, and then he's using lightning in another, and I thought that was a really...
Yeah, it switches between them. It's not in set phases, so about halfway through the boss fight, it starts channeling different elements, and then every time it channels one, it gets attacks specific to that element and starts doing status effects that match it, and then you've got about a minute or 30 seconds before it switches to the next one, regardless of how much damage you've done to it. So it keeps you on your toes.
Yeah, sounds like it. So who was the hardest?
Well, I never beat R'hllana, but then I also spent the less time on her. The dragon was definitely easiest. That was one I managed to crack first time around. I would say R'hllana and the lion are probably about even. R'hllana's maybe a little more nasty because she's very quick, and there's a lot of AoE attacks where she'll be standing in the middle of a firestorm and you're just waiting for her to finish going, yep, I can't even hit you for right now, so when you're done.
Oh my god, great. So going a little bit further into combat, is there any new things that really stood out to you, Mo?
Oh, well, there's a ton of new gear. 100 new weapons and 8 different weapon categories have been added in the DLC. So it's massive. What I found most fun were the new martial arts, which I found 2 varieties, one that's for dex users and one that's for strength users, which are equipped like weapons. They're basically gloves that you put on and have their own attack patterns, and they're very rapid strikes. There's a lot of poise damage, so it's good for sort of knocking enemies back, and it's about doing a real sort of flurry of blows in rapid succession and leaping back and staying very agile. And it was a very dynamic way to fight that I thought was incredibly satisfying in the moment.
Yeah, that sounds pretty different as well.
Yeah, it's a little bit more Sekiro-y in those moments, or maybe a little bit Bloodborne, which is very fast-paced in the same way.
Yeah.
It's a fairly aggressive way to fight, at least with the 2 martial arts that I found. It's not a, shield and wait. It's going in, sort of throwing punches as fast as you can and diving back out of the way when they're about to retaliate.
And in terms of like the new weapons, did you have a favourite?
Probably the dex-focused martial arts, which were called Dry Leaf something. There was a sword that I thought was quite funny called Milady.
Milady?
Yeah, I don't know if that's one of those things that doesn't necessarily translate or is very well chosen. Could be either one. There are some fun new spirit ashes. You can summon one of the big crawling hands now. A lot of us found that players want some help. We found that heavy hitting weapons were better for the bosses because the lion keeps leaping about and throwing lightning around everywhere, and R'hllana is, as mentioned, always standing in the middle of a firestorm. So your actual chances to hit them are kind of few and far between. So when you do, you want a cathedral on a stick, basically, to make the most of those couple of strikes you're going to get before you have to back away again.
You mentioned new spirit summons, so which ones did you come across while you were playing?
So they gave us 3 to start with, one of which was the giant scuttly hand, which I think is new for...
I've not had it as a spirit.
I don't think I have either. And a big one, certainly. And then there was a knight character of fairly standard, sort of bulky shield and large hammer type. And then there's a new enemy in it that's a sort of bedraggled-looking peacock in armor, with a sort of slightly decayed look to it. You fight a lot of them in one of the first areas, but you can get them as a summon as well as this thing that flaps around and swoops in and spits up projectiles and so on.
They love a wacky bird.
They do, and I'm not opposed to it. There's actually a huge amount of enemy variety, which I thought was quite fun, despite that the 2 initial main areas that you have to pick from are 2 different kinds of castle. They're both filled with fairly diverse enemy types. One of them is these horrible crab scorpions that chase after you, and the other one has the sort of big shriveled ogres from the base game, but now they have sorcery. Just because they needed the advantage. So yeah, the enemies are constantly keeping you on your toes.
Speaking of enemies, so obviously I've seen the big, giant, flaming wicker guys. They're not bosses, are they?
No, there's one really early on, like almost out of the gate, stomping around the main area. And while it has a massive health bar and is incredibly hard to kill, it's more akin to the giants that shoot arrows at you in the base game in the southern Limgrave area. Not anything you have to go up against, but it's just some giant piece of artillery wandering around, and he throws fire attacks at you and kicks burning boulders in your direction. If you get too close, he'll pick you up and drop you in the top of his head, which I think is an instant kill.
So that ruins my strategy then of just hack at their legs.
I mean, if you're fast, you can, keep out of the way.
So, talking a little bit more about the areas, which areas did you see?
So we were limited in the preview to everything in the first section of map you uncover, like in the base game, that you find the map fragments that reveal part of it. And they basically said, you'll find the first one almost straight away. Do not leave that section. That's what the preview covers. You've got 3 hours, but you're limited within this area. The opening place is sort of these wide plains of grass and spirits that look rather like this. And then you've got the choice of 2 castles for the main story. But there's also, in classic Elden Ring style, nooks and crannies full of secret areas. You can find a dungeon where they're making the big hot boys.
The warrior jar.
Indeed, yeah. It's stuffed full of them. And then the castles, one of them is sort of abandoned and the other one is under siege when you get to it. So they have sort of very different energies in that way.
So you did both the castles?
Yes.
Did you have a preference?
I don't think so. I think they were both very good in sort of different ways. I mean, one of them is sort of climbing over rubble and feels more infested, like it's like nothing's been here for a while, or none of the owners have been here for a while. And then the other one, Castellensis, feels more active. It's got, sort of platoons waiting outside and you've got to get through, and then there's defenses within. But it feels like when you're not there, they're maybe against each other, like you wandered into a siege, which is a very different kind of energy to the sort of abandoned, marble ruins of I think it's called Bellarat on the other side of the map.
So my final question, and the most important question of all, did you meet the glowing worms?
Yes, I did. They didn't do anything. They just seemed to be passive observers. I couldn't bring myself to kick one of them, just to see if it did anything. So for now, they seem to just be along for the ride, though who knows, as you get further in, maybe there'll be a big one that goes for your neck.
Thank you so much for taking the time to
My
talk
pleasure.
And stay tuned for plenty more Shadow of the Erdtree content on GamesRadar.com.